Welcome to Petronoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, Petronoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is Petronoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to Petronoia. I'm your host, Dan Romito. I am joined today with good friend and fellow Floridian. Turns out that we're actually quasi-neighbors, Tom Pyle. So Tom, before we get rolling on everything, why don't you give your brief background? Let us know how you got to be here, what made you come to Florida, and what are you working on today?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. And I feel like we're fellow neighbors, but we travel so much that we're never.
Right. Very true.
Yeah, I've been in D.C. Well, I was in D.C. My office is still there for going on 30 years. I've worked on Capitol Hill, and I had my own business for a while. And now I run an organization called the Institute for Energy Research, and we have an advocacy arm called the American Energy Alliance. And we are a true North free market think tank in D.C., the only one that focuses exclusively on energy and environmental policy. And we cover the gamut from federal policy, state policy, international issues, and mainly are focused on how these policies impact people. A lot of times we get bogged down in numbers and macro and stuff. And I always instruct my staff that, this is about folks. And so we always try to include the human element in all of our conversations. So
love it. And so, we've done a couple panels together. The most recent one was in our backyard in Ponte Vedra. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was you actually had the opportunity to work with Trump in the first iteration, right? In the maiden voyage. Mm-hmm. So why don't you give a little bit of backdrop on what was that like, but also like the primary differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2?
Yeah, well, it was chaos.
What?
Yeah, it was chaos. President Trump, he wasn't ever an elected official of any kind. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I don't know if you remember that movie, The Candidate, with Robert Redford, right?
A little bit before my time, but yeah, I've heard of it.
He was so focused on winning, he won his Senate seat. He leaned over to his guy and was like, now what do we do? Right. And I think there was a lot of that in the first term. The thing is normal transitions, you go into an agency and you talk to the agency heads, the non-political heads, mm-hmm. all the different silos within the department. In my case, it was the Department of Energy. And you talk to them about the programs, what's working, what's not, right? It's an opportunity for the non-politicals to tell you how they feel without the pressure of the political staff kind of breathing down their necks. Now, that in and of itself was a full-time job. But the other thing we had to do was literally prepare President Trump and the agency heads for how to govern. Because there was just a lot of promises were made, and he's a big fan of keeping his promises. So we had to translate all of those promises into objectionable policy initiatives, right? So, President Trump, you wouldn't know this now because he did issue a fair amount of executive orders mm-hmm. first month or so. This time around, he's eclipsed that, obviously.
Right.
And so, and the president was very deferential in the first term to like the establishment.
Yeah.
Right. He had Reince Priebus as his chief of staff. He allowed John Boehner, who was the speaker at the time, to kind of, fill a lot of his positions for him. And it didn't turn out so well.
Right.
There were a lot of, butting heads, and there just wasn't a lot of harmony in the first few years. The difference now, and I think it's quite a phenomenon because, as you know, President Trump is the only president since Grover Cleveland to win a term and then come back after losing, right?
Right.
So that time between the first term and the second, where everyone wrote President Trump's political obituary, he was working, right? He had a full team of formers kind of housed at a think tank called America First Policy Institute. And they spent those 4 years preparing President Trump for the second term. And it's reflected in the swiftness, the flood the zone strategy taking place now.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, just it seems he's only been in office 60 days, right? It already seems like it's been, 3 years with the amount of stuff that he's done. The other thing is because he's moving so quick, I actually think it's separated, it's bifurcated, right? So I don't think he has a 4-year presidency, right? He's got the next 18 months because primaries kick in. And interestingly enough, one of our guests last week, Tim Tarpley, I didn't know that this is true. It's very common, it's almost conventional wisdom that the presidency's party loses seats in the primary. Like, that's a thing. So when you think about, how much time this guy has to actually get stuff done, I mean, he's working on a real expedited timetable. But that said, I don't think anyone realized or appreciated just how quick he was going to move. And in terms of expectations, he's already accomplished so much. What do you think a realistic set of expectations are for the next, call like 12 to 18 months? Because unless you disagree with me, because after that, it's sort of like lame duck and you're sort of preparing for the next wave of whether it's JD Vance or whomever to take over.
Yeah. I mean, I've long since stopped predicting the outcome of elections and midterms in particular, because we're in this weird period in politics where the sort of expected outcome isn't really happening. And I don't know what's going to happen in this midterm. I mean, if you looked at it today, you'd say, well, the numbers dictate, and midterms are usually referendums on the first couple years or whatever, that the Republicans might be in jeopardy, particularly in the House. The Republicans have more seats to defend in the Senate, but we've already seen 2 Democrat open seats, 2 Democrat retirements in Michigan,
right?
Example, which is now technically a swing/lean Trump state. And so I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but regardless, I agree with the timeline. Particularly since he's in essence a lame duck, if you would. Right. So here's what I think. Yes, I think he has done a tremendous amount in a very short period of time. I think he has a team around him that he trusts, and that's important. And I think he has some competency there as well. However, you and I have talked about this. EOs are one thing.
Yeah.
You have got a thing called the Administrative Procedures Act. If you do not dot I's and cross T's on undoing all these regulations properly, you might not get as many of them as you think or hope. A friend of mine said, the party you prefer that's in power generally doesn't get as much done as you hope.
Right.
The party that's not in power generally doesn't do as much damage as you think. And that's
with the exception of Biden.
Yeah, right. But that's also a function of the system, right? So look, here's what I think. For example, IR has already sent 3 petitions into the EPA and the Army Corps. Get going on Section 401, which is the wetlands thing that the states are using to stop pipelines.
No, wait, just real quick. Okay, so hold that thought. Just expand on why that's so important, right?
Well, they have got to start the petition. They have got to start the regulatory process because it is in and of itself a 12 to 18 month long run. And that may or may not include the lawsuits. And so the EOs directed the agencies to do certain things. The agencies now have to do them. We got the first wave of nominees in place. Those are the heads of the agencies, but it's the deputies and the undersecretaries and the other political folks that need to get in there and start getting this stuff going. So our job at IR is to make sure that they are ready to go, right? Yeah. So we submit those petitions. We do them because we think that they're, plug and play, right? Here are all the arguments why you should overturn or Biden's water the U.S. rule. Here are all the pieces why, so that they can start that petition process. The other thing I think is going to happen is, and it's unfortunate as a creature of the Congress and particularly the House, that Congress is they're just inept.
Right.
They're completely clueless. They don't know how to govern, to legislate anymore. So really, we're going to have one big, beautiful bill, right? The reconciliation bill, the budget bill. And that's going to make or break, I think, what happens maybe in the midterms, but definitely is going to have a cloud over the next presidential election with President Trump not being able to run again. So really, realistically, you're going to get one big budget reconciliation bill, which will include a lot of the tax changes that President Trump wants to make. Hopefully, we will take huge swaths of Biden's IRA and undo them. And then in terms of another priority in energy world, I think there's going to be a permitting bill, a bipartisan permitting bill that'll. There's a lot of inertia around that, and that's probably a 2 to 2.5 year window from now to then.
My fear, and once again, I'm optimistic. So obviously, I'm very bullish on what this administration can accomplish. But to elaborate on some of the points that you make, I think people forget about the process and your point on EOs, executive orders, versus the permanency of regulations that we'd like to see stay in the mix permanently. Like, one of the major obstacles, and once again, if I don't have this right, correct me. We are up against the clock because the regulatory process, to your point, takes 12 to 18 months. This stuff will be soon. Like, there will be lawsuits that face it. You can only put so much in that big, beautiful bill. Like, help the audience, help me just. How do you think about this reasonably, right? We have executive orders. Those are short-term fixes, right? They bridge a path towards regulatory permanence, which takes 12 to 18 months. But then you still have, to your point, Congress being correctly inept, this problem of actually getting stuff done. And then you have this big halo of the big, beautiful bill. Like, how do you organize this stuff? Like, how do we think about it without feeling stupid?
You kind of think about it as running concurrently, because the administration can do a lot of things regardless of Congress. Congress has given the executive this heavy increase in authority by virtue of the fact that they have been off the board. Right. So a lot of the things that President Trump needs to do at EPA, at Interior, at Department of Energy, those things can be done now. They can get started. There are things that Congress can do, and let's get to the electric vehicle stuff if we can.
Yeah, of course.
Reconciliation, President Biden set the precedent for this. He went alone in this reconciliation bill.
He was the original dictator?
Yeah.
He's the original, the OG. Okay.
The pro-democracy crew. But what, for your audience, what reconciliation is a budget procedure. It says that you don't need 60 votes in the Senate if you're adjusting the budget to comport with the budget document that is the first in the two. So you've got a budget bill the House passed a couple of weeks ago. Now the committees are instructed to go back and find the money, in which case they kind of comb through programs in their jurisdiction. Then it's all cobbled together and the House votes on a budget. Theoretically, the Senate will stop being stupid and move the House budget. They've got this notion that they want to split up immigration and energy in the tax bill, which is just ridiculous.
You're against that?
Oh, 100%. There's no way a tax stuff will get done.
Really? So do you think the only way that tax stuff gets done, it gets lumped in with the energy stuff?
100%. And the immigration stuff. Because no Republican is going to vote against an immigration bill if it doesn't have the tax provisions that they want or don't want, right?
Okay.
It's almost a way to keep the Republicans in line.
Yeah.
And then the reconciliation happens after that. So I expect it to be a June, July thing.
Okay. So realistically, we're looking at June, July. You think it will be one beautiful big bill, which frankly, everybody is saying. Like, what scares you in terms of obstacles? What holds up that timeline? What prevents it from getting done?
The Republicans.
Okay, elaborate.
There are little pockets and bands of Republicans that absolutely must have this, not must have that.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the salt stuff in the north in New York.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which, by the way, let's just divert from energy a second. Why on earth would we reward high tax states by letting them up their state taxes?
Right. You're just
subsidizing. It moved to Florida.
Yeah, 100%.
So, and then you've got the Iowans who care about biodiesel tax credits and this and that. And, you know, you'll have pockets of these Republicans who draw red lines in things, and it's going to be up to Speaker Johnson and the whip's office, Tom Emmer, and obviously President Trump to corral all these votes and get them in. We're looking at 2, 3, 4 vote majority in the House, depending on the day. And so that's just super hard to do, right? I worked in the whip's office. I counted votes for part of my career, and you know, you don't have a lot of room for error, right? You know, Tom Massey no on everything, and so you're
all Massey is because his argument is essentially that he is a hard no to anything that comes across his desk unless it substantially trims the deficit, right?
Yeah, that's his red line, for example, and he does, unlike others, he's not really malleable. So the challenge will be to figure out a way to sort of put this puzzle together to give President Trump meaningful tax reform. And that's important because folks right now are like, hey, man, you said you were going to help me put money in my pocket.
Right.
That's okay. You're screwing around.
It's an adult program. We're good.
You're screwing around with tariffs, Greenland, Panama Canal. You know, you got, you know, he's doing all good things, you know, trying to cobble a peace deal in Russia and Ukraine and things like that. But unless and until that tax bill is passed and it has time to permeate into the economy,
right,
they're not going to be seeing those lower prices. And quite frankly, he's sort of foreshadowing that a little bit, right? I mean, if you look at the economic numbers, it's not looking great. I mean, we could have a mini recession here
that's where I get so nervous is I think what speaks the most is what people are experiencing with their checkbook, right? And that would actually put immigration in there. And I don't think the demise of Biden, if you will, had anything necessarily to do with anything outside of inflation. Like everyone was like, prices are just way too high. And then it was like a list of grievances before. I think personally, if prices weren't doing what they would, there'd be some sort of dissonance, some sort of just validation of people's head that, okay, maybe Biden's the guy, right? Particularly in the swing states. My fear is that if Trump can't get inflation under control, which I will fully admit, this is an inherited problem, right? I don't think anyone necessarily disagrees with that, but it is his problem nonetheless. What we're conveying to our clients is there is a possibility that if Trump doesn't get inflation and prices under control, that is a full steam ahead opportunity for Democrats to regain the office. And then all this crap that you were talking about that you hated with the IRA and with the EPA and the list goes on, that just gets put in place again. Like it just gets reinstalled. So in many ways, like we tell people, like just because Trump is in office, like the ESG contingency or the legacy, call it ESG classification, that's not a foregone conclusion that it's going away. Like Trump's ability to get prices back under control in many ways is a determinant for what the next 8 years looks like. Because if a Democrat gets back into the presidency, odds are, you know, the probabilities on their side that they're going to be there for 8 years, not necessarily just 4 years.
Yeah, again, you know, like it's hard to predict, especially right now with the shift in who's voting for Republicans and who's voting for Democrats and things like that. But what is consistent over the last 10 or 15 years is swings, right? Yeah. Changes in power, both on Capitol Hill and in the White House. President Trump created a roadmap for the Republicans to be able to have sustained wins here electorally. But again, to your point, it's the economy, stupid, right? I mean, people need to see and feel relief. Yeah. And then everything else falls into place. The Democrats still have an uphill battle, even because they are just so, if you look at them, they're so in the wilderness right now. I mean, their leadership, it won't, the old guys won't and gals will not let go.
Right.
of power. They're waving cane.
They're literally in their 80s, right? It's like the old people at the nursing home screaming at the clouds and complaining that the soup is cold, right? It's Bernie, it's Nancy. The fact that they're literally in their 80s, it's like, just, you're done good. Go retire. Just go play golf or do whatever the fuck you do. Right there you go. Like I asked you.
Exactly.
So who would you say the leader of the Democratic Party is? Like, who's the emerging? So 4 years ago we had DeSantis, we had Nikki Haley. You could even make an argument that JD Vance was an up and comer. You had this like younger version or this younger roster of talent that were like late 30s, early 40s. I think I don't necessarily know how old Nikki Haley is, but she's young anyway. Like I look at the roster of up and comers, if that's what you want to call them, with the Democratic Party, and I can't pinpoint, frankly, anyone that would even remotely come close. Now, once again, I'm biased, but who would you say the up and comers are for the Democratic Party?
I can't either, and that's the trouble that they're going to have. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries is a cartoon character. I mean, he's just every time Donald Trump gets, it's like, dude, you're not, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but Kathleen Clark, I mean, these folks are not that much younger, quite frankly, than the folks that won't let go. And, the problem that the Democrats have is that there's a battle royal right now going on between the hard progressives, the folks who are getting, clicks and TikTok, followings and things, and folks who actually want to move the party back to sanity. And so that's going to it's going to be a while, I think, before we know the answer to that question.
And it presents obviously an opportunity, right, to retake this narrative, sort of bringing it back to energy. Like I was joking about this on a prior episode. I went to New York to make the rounds, and you get a sense that investors are very much coming around to the merits and the opportunity and what the future holds for natural gas. But the first thing that they wanted to talk about, literally in almost every single meeting, was, have I watched Landman, and is it accurate? And it's like, and that joke now is overplayed, but I'm still surprised by just how many people have asked me that. And, the second thing they ask is like, well, what's going on in the energy space? So, there is this prime opportunity to retake the narrative predominantly from, let's call it, environmental NGOs or just anyone pushing the tractor route. What do you think has to be put in place? Like we've talked a little bit about policy, but, just strategically, whether it's corporates, investors, or whoever's call it, pro-realism, pro-pragmatism as it relates to the energy industry. Like, what has to be done to get this narrative back to economic reality?
Yeah, well, first of all, you got to get the policy right.
Yeah.
And you also have to have, the leadership has to be for this stuff, which clearly Donald Trump is, right? And even I've been kind of trolling in some of the, lefty energy podcast world, and they're not using the words net zero anymore. Right. Not talking about climate change as an existential threat.
I just got a notice from the CFA Institute. Like I took their, just because I was curious about it, I took their ESG curriculum. It's like a 3-part test, whatever it is. And I got an email today and they're like, we're renaming it from a certificate in ESG investing to a certificate in sustainability investing. Like there's all this rebranding that's taking place.
The rebranding is there, but these guys aren't going to go away, right? I mean, the NGOs that you described, they're now lawyering up and they're going to use their, resources to fight in court. They have tremendous power and they're influencing the public utility commissions across the country. They're creating like mayhem in certain states like California, New York, Massachusetts, and things like that. But I think there's two things. One I mentioned is alignment with energy, with the use of our resources, the production, distribution, both here and globally. Second is we have got to we have to create an environment in the financial world where it's okay care about these resources again. And, it's not that hard because those guys, the investor class, they're not particularly ideological. There's all the money.
It is weird, right? It is weird. Like we just did this. Like we'll be releasing an update, but we released this at the end of last year. The valuation, the trading multiples in energy are so low. It's like, well, what's going on? And so when we benchmarked it against other sectors, relative to the market and relative to the other cap intensive industries, namely industrials and materials, the S&P 500 energy sector has higher operating margins. They have lower debt. Their balance sheet is in a much stronger financial position. They have higher cash flow yields. They have higher payout ratios. They have higher dividend yields. They have higher buyback yields. Their revenue growth isn't on par with the market, but it's not lagging that much. It's not as lagging as you would think. You can make an argument that over the last 5 years, the volatility in revenue growth is higher. So that affects beta, which impacts cost of capital. We won't necessarily take a complete vacation to Nerd Island, but nonetheless, just the high level fundamentals will say for the metrics that have the greatest impact on valuation, whether it's margin, leverage, payout, dividend yield, buyback yield, growth, the S&P 500 is still trading 30% discount to the market. And so it's like you take a step back, what is driving that? I still think there's a heavy element of trust. I was looking on, gratuitous plug. Now that I released my book, I get all these DMs. And one DM was like, hey, you didn't even mention Deepwater Horizon. And it's like, and I guarantee the only reason that person knew, it was a guy, the only reason that dude knew about Deepwater Horizon was because of the Marky Mark movie. Like he didn't do like this epic, set of research and was like, oh, Deepwater Horizon. But bring it full circle, I do think there's an element of trust that is lacking within the industry. And it begs the question, like financial performance is there. It's like, what the hell has to be done to bring investor trust back into the market?
Yeah. You keep hearing certainty.
Yeah.
Keep hearing that word thrown around. It's hard to make those long-term investment decisions.
Yeah.
Oh no, when you got these wild swings in sort of policy, clients an existential threat. You guys can't do business here anymore. Right? Versus we got liquid gold. We're gonna drill, baby, drill. We're gonna do it all. And like my attitude is that you have to create the environment so that these folks can make long-term decisions based on market, based on what the forecasted needs are. And I think that if you do that and you can get past one of these swings, like if you get through a change in administration with much less intense swings back and forth, that might be the answer. And I don't know.
So it's almost showcasing an immunity from the anticipated political pendulum that will inevitably take place probably over the next decade. Do you think Europe has anything? Europe just seems like a mess. Do you want to provide me your thoughts on Europe, and then does that impact how it's perceived, how energy is perceived?
It kind of cuts both ways, and you know this better than me. I mean, we don't operate in a vacuum, right? A lot of these companies that do business all over the world basically have to comply with the lowest common, they have to comply with the regulations in Europe. Right. So what they're saying is, that's great if we, have a much more favorable environment here, but I just want to do all this reporting over there.
I mean, it's just on that point. I mean, it's timely because I just had this conversation in Oklahoma last week. And, I felt in many ways that I was telling my daughter that there's no Santa Claus, because with Trump taking over the administration, the vast majority of the Oklahomans, rightfully so, are excited, but they incorrectly assume that they're in the clear. And my point to them was, you have to understand that when it comes to molding policy, the ones that Trump is going to listen to the most are the mega caps, Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, and they love the regulatory environment because it provides them a competitive edge.
I wish that wasn't the case, but you're right.
That's the case. And so then you have the tech bros, and we'll touch upon this, the tech bros can't do tech bro stuff without natural gas. And the group that understands that dynamic, perhaps greater than anybody, is the environmental NGOs. So if the environmental NGOs don't have the opportunity to shame Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, because Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, et cetera, or the mega caps, I should say, universally don't really feel the impact that much of regulatory. And if natural gas is here to stay and it's going to be the epicenter of energy policy, who do you think environmental NGOs are going to go to for quick wins? We're going to smaller operators in the lesser known basins, and they're going to make an example out of them. I don't think that that's being discussed as much.
That's right. And they also are the ones who don't have the resources to fight.
That's right.
As well. I mean, I am pleased by the fact that the big guys are pushing back on this, what I call, lawfare, green lawfare, with all these suits, these climate suits and everything else, which is really important. And the tech bros, the tech guys, they kind of got us into this mess. Because when electricity demand was flat, and there was all this room for growth in renewables before it started screwing things up, all in on this stuff.
Yeah,
they went in, in with the green community and said, "Oh yeah, we're going to power all this stuff with renewables. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful." And now with AI, I mean, I think Goldman just said that the data center demand is going to grow by 160%.
It's insane. I mean, just to get perspective on that, I mean, Virginia, for the time being, is clearly the data center capital, frankly, of the world. But you have Texas making a nice little run. It could easily overtake Virginia over the next 10 years. And if you look at the amount of power now that Texas consumes, it's right around like 70, 80 gigawatts. They're forecasting over the next decade, actually sooner than that, right around 2030, so half a decade actually, that demand's going to go from 80 gigawatts to 150 gigawatts. And it's like, well, where the hell is that going to come from? And do we have the infrastructure in place? And are we going to need pipelines? And our grid is already, my age, frankly, right around my age, 40 something years old. How do we address that? And then you throw in the component that I think Trump is correct on this. We want to be the energy capital of the world. We want to be the center of production, which brings me back kind of full circle to our points on Europe. Like where are they going? Like, where's this all do? And how does that influence U.S. policy, particularly like with LNG? Like I go back and forth almost like on a daily basis thinking about Europe because it's such a mess, but like level set for me.
Yeah. So, there's two things. One is that President Trump is clearly sending a strong message to Europe that they need to, clean up their mess, particularly when it comes to defending themselves, or particular against Russia. And, that means that and they've already committed this. I think last week, Germany said that they're going to dedicate 5 or 6%. Of their
dedicate what they're originally on the hook.
Exactly.
And that it's just
perfectly rational for President Trump to do.
Right.
On the energy side, they're still a mess because they recognize, for example, how much gas have they imported from Russia during this whole 3-year war? Right. Almost as much as they've spent trying to help Ukraine, if not more.
Yeah.
It's
this vicious circle. It's like buy Russian gas that funds the war in Ukraine, but then protest how much you are against the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Don't buy Russian gas.
The guy who just won in Germany, I can't remember his name, but he ran, he was in Merkel's party and basically ran against Merkel.
Yeah.
Right. And part of it was that they want to try to stem this exodus of manufacturing,
right,
which requires power. Right. Which means that they need to import more LNG from the U.S. and other places. But it also means that they've got to make some decisions about whether they're going to continue with this ridiculous sort of energy vendee or these net zero policies and start making, really hard and good choices about solidifying their ability to have not cheap, but like not insane expensive.
Right. Yeah, it's not even cheap. It's just break the bank. What drives me nuts about Europe, and we can throw California into that mix, is I think the EU, if I'm right, it's 5 or 6% of global emissions. It's definitely less than 10. Like I think the exact numbers is like 5 or 6. And their head is so far up their ass that if we go net zero tomorrow, the world doesn't feel anything, right? So this notion that you would disproportionately penalize an entire continent's economy to get environmental bragging rights, like they've completely bypassed the argument of what technological innovation can we employ to get greater efficiencies, right? I don't hear Europe talking about SMEs or nuclear to the extent that they should. You even have Ireland, like Ireland asked Google to leave the country because Google was going to take a substantial portion of the existing electricity because they're data centers. I don't understand. And once again, this mentality is in California as well. Like this save the world, or we have to save the world. Like the onus is on us. Like, and once again, they will use the opposite. You're like, oh, you don't want to save the world. It's like, just because I say you don't want to save the world doesn't mean I said we shouldn't. Yeah. But this foolish notion that if the EU goes to net zero at all costs, I always ask this question. It's like, well, then what? Like you guys, like your economy is destroyed, your national security is compromised, your socioeconomic potential is basically eliminated. You essentially become the laughingstock of the globe. And then ironically, you make your adversaries that much more powerful, whether it's Russia or it's China. And then it goes back, well, we have this existential crisis. It's like, oh my God. Like,
Yeah.
What do you think happens? Like what has to happen for them to sort of just get it right?
It's the same phenomenon as here. They're just a little bit further ahead. The parties, the EU party, the parties that had controlled the EU, Germany and others, had no choice but to go to bed with the Green parties over there. And
why? I mean, was that just because the Green Party picked up all this momentum?
They had the seats that they were, because they formed the coalitions there, right? And like here, the same with the Democratic Party. The environmental organizations have not, they're no longer about the environment.
Right.
They're about, they're part of the Democratic Party machine.
Yeah.
And they provide funding. They have super PACs. They do a lot of the organizing. And the litmus test for the Democrats for so long was how forcefully can you hate fossil fuel production, coal or natural gas? And if you can do it more forcefully than the other candidates, then we're going to back you and put all our muscle behind you. And that was sort of, the Bojo phenomenon. This guy, Boris Johnson, was bragging about wanting to, make fracking great again in Europe. And then he did a complete about face. He was supportive of not expanding the terminal at Heathrow, for example.
Right. And
in all of that, because these guys, that was sort of the way that you had to be there in order to stay in power.
Yeah.
So that's been part of the problem, and unwinding that is going to take a really long time.
Well, I also think, it's very clear to me, as cynical as it sounds, that the vast majority of NGOs, not all of them, because there are some environmental NGOs that, God bless them, they do live by the strategy that their charter puts in place. So I'm not lumping all of them in the same bucket, but I am lumping a substantial portion of them in the bucket that they could care less about the environment. They've understood their ability to raise money and to garner political power, and that's a very enticing, motivating feature. And the catalyst, if you will, that has facilitated that ability to garner all that political power and to raise all that money is fossil fuels, right? Is anti-fossil fuel. If it was like obesity, or it was like, like Packer fans or something like that, Green Bay Packer fans, like just passionate about anything, I don't think fossil fuel necessarily is the object. I think it's the mechanism that taught environmental NGOs and made them, very greedy, frankly, in the respect that it gave them so much political influence and so much money. Our people don't realize how much money these people have, and they're pouring it into technology and they're pouring it into data services. And what are they doing? They're monitoring the fossil fuel industry so they could call out other particular companies to raise more money, right? They're not calling on action. It's this dirty little cycle. And once again, I fully acknowledge how cynical that sounds, but I don't think I'm necessarily that far off.
Trust me, you're only scratching the surface on the suit.
I feel like there's like
I'm doing this stuff in
like
30 years. We have a project.
shit. Yeah.
A project that's at least 10 years old called Big Green Inc. We track all the money flow from major foundations or philanthropists, the Soroses of the world, this Vice dude, some other.
Expand upon that. Yeah, we've talked about that briefly, but yeah, expand upon that. Like, as much as you're comfortable doing without getting like the hate mail, like I think people, not that they're naive, that's not the right word, but they're just coming to learn like how extensive and influential and wealthy these groups are.
Yeah, the Rockefeller Trust, which was formed by John D. Rockefeller, is run by
John D. Rockefeller of oil royalty.
Yes, are run by heirs of Mr. Rockefeller, whose mission is to put the fossil fuel industry out of business. Right, and that's just one of them. You've got and the Energy Foundation in San Francisco, the Tides Foundation. You've got the tech guys started all these the Packard Foundation. Google's guy, what's his name there?
Sergey
Schmidt.
I don't know. No,
one of the original Google guys has a foundation. Huge hundreds of billions of dollars are funneling to organizations for the express purpose of blocking pipelines, stopping coal plants. Mike Bloomberg. These folks, for some reason, decided that, like you said, in politics, you pick a target.
Right.
Just like in all our ESG advocacy, we picked the target. Larry Fink couldn't have been your target.
Right.
Right.
It's pound a bullseye on himself.
Yeah. And you focus in on that. And that's, like you said, how they organize. That's their enemy. Right. And the grassroots folks splashing paint on the Mona Lisa and chaining themselves, to automobile or to
super gluing themselves to the street.
Yeah. And so, yes, it's a massive industry. And quite frankly, I'm going to get pretty cynical here. A lot of these folks have wives on the boards of the Nature Conservancy or the Sierra Club or the National Wildlife Foundation. It is a way to get those organizations to do their dirty work for them. And the dirty work in this case is promoting renewables, quote, clean energy tech over traditionals or conventionals. And that's, how you do it on the money side of the equation. Right. So yeah, it's a political problem as much as it is an environmental.
I think it's like three mutually exclusive tenets of the bar stool, right? And what I mean by that is, like, to your point, you have the fundraising and political element, and then you have this investor aspect where it's like, where do I just gain alpha? Is it renewables, clean tech, fossil fuels, what have you? And then the third tenet would just be like the general, like the Joe Schmo off the street, just what do I think about that? And I think one of the things that the environmental NGOs, like, what was genius, whether it was intended or not, and to be fair, it probably was intended, is you capture the hearts and minds of like the everyday person and you get them on your side. Like, I remember when I was a kid, environmentalists, you would kind of make fun of them. You're like, here's that hippie who doesn't shower and uses like some weird baking soda concoction as deodorant and doesn't really work, and they wear Birkenstock, blah, 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 blah. Today, it's almost like revered. It's like this flip. Now, bring it full circle to the landman, maybe that changes it. But, your point on the vast majority of Silicon Valley had a hand in creating this dynamic that was anti-fossil fuels. And in this weird twist of irony, now there's this dynamic where I think the future of their economic prowess is almost reliance, not almost, is reliance on the energy space. There's this
energy in particular and gas in particular.
Yeah, 100% natural gas. And so does this organically take care of itself, or are those mutually exclusive buckets just never going to be acknowledged by the generalists?
Yeah. So you touched on a lot there. I'll try to get through some of it. So my view of Silicon Valley and the tech guys was the Vinod Khoslas and the John Doerrs, sort of the old guard, if you will, investors who started this whole, business of computing and getting chips smaller and faster and better. They were so smart that they thought they could do with energy what they did with tech, with computing and everything else. And so to their credit, it's not like they said, the government's going to do it all. They made substantial investments in this stuff. Yeah. But what they did was they harnessed the government to help them and to also sort of put a stop on their losses, right?
The government was their Luca Brasi.
That's right, exactly. And what they realized is reason they couldn't break through is because energy is not like computing. There's no Moore's law.
Right.
Energy is all about bang for your buck, right? Mm-hmm. For your BTU. And because of that, and the fact that, renewables was so small in terms of the energy mix that there was room to grow without creating a lot of impact. Right. So you called that combination. But like you said, what's the turn? Well, the turn now is that they need natural gas, right? I mean, we think that natural gas is going to supply 60+% of this power demand growth from AI and data centers, at least the next 10 and 15 years. There's no other alternative. Right. They talk all they want about SMRs. They've restarted all the idle nuclear plants in this country. There's nowhere else to go. They're not building data centers in California, not building data centers in states that have a genuine, a reliable mix of electricity and a stable grid, because that's got to be on all the time. And so they're not going to admit that they screwed up. And I'm not asking them to. And I'm not overly comfortable with the fact that they're moving into my world, but that's okay, because they have a lot of juice, right? And they're going to need it to create a lot of juice, right? Meaning electricity. Because I agree that we do want to keep AI here in this country. Yeah. I don't want it to go to China. So what I think is going to happen is they're slowly just going to stop talking about that stuff. Mm-hmm. Not going to necessarily wrap their arms around us per se, but they're going to just start moving forward and starting to work with utilities and build this necessary infrastructure to get this electricity demand that's needed to power these centers. And that's okay. I'll take it, right? I'd really like to shame them all.
Yeah.
Like I told you so and all that stuff, but I don't have the luxury of that. Like I want this done. And so I really think that's going to happen. The when you talk about hearts and minds, right? The kids are just dumb. That's just the way it is. We were dumb. They're dumb, right? And really, really dumb when it comes to energy literacy.
Oh, dude, I just spent literally the latter half of last week at Disney. I can attest to your statement that kids are dumb. Yes, they are.
Like you think about it, like I don't know if you remember this, but a while ago, Shell was trying to build some gas in Alaska.
Okay.
And they were building their rigs in the port, and you got to get to from the port, you got to get around and out. And there's this big bridge, and they were suspending themselves on kayaks. Right? And like they got a cell phone, they got a kayak. All this stuff is made with the material that they're protesting.
Right.
Don't make the connection, right? Like the warm Patagonia coats that they wore to protest standing in the Standing Rock Sioux with the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yeah.
All of that is possible because of fossil fuel. They just don't get it, and they're not smart enough to figure it out. But it's also cool to hang out with, like you go to protests and maybe you could meet some girls and whatnot, right?
One of the sidetrack. So the Disney story that I thought was hilarious, like how Hollywood Studios has the Star Wars park, and it is immaculate, man. It is really awesome. Cool.
It really is.
It's pretty cool. And then one of the rides is the Millennium Falcon. And so, my 11-year-old, who is the biggest smartass on the planet, like he is just a colossal smartass. He's actually one of very few people that his one-liners make everybody laugh. He gets me going. But he's being all serious, and he's like trying to figure out like the physics behind like the Millennium Falcon and all this stuff, because it still doesn't resonate. And he's like, what do you think? He's like, does the Millennium Falcon run on like gas? Like, where are their gas stations? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm sure there's some sort of fuel source. I did not want to go out. I know what he was pushing though. And he's like, no. Like, I bet you that the Millennium Falcon runs. And he said, I bet you it runs on fossil fuels. And this nerd, I swear to God, he was a little bit younger than me. He had to be in his 30s, who's dressed like Han Solo. So a grown man who cut in front of us, and I didn't say anything. I was like, fine, man. Like, you must really want to go on this ride. God bless you. Cuts in front of us, dressed like Han Solo, turns around and like gives like the evilest look. And he's like, I think that they're hydrogen powered. I was
Yeah.
like,
Exactly.
if anything, like what they should do is just create like this separate section in Hollywood Studios to like where normal people can just take the nerds and like give them like wedgies or whatever whenever they do something stupid like that. But I was dying laughing, and I'm like, I can't even get away like here on vacation, man. I don't want to talk about like the controversy surrounding the fuel source of a Millennium Falcon. Like, can we just get on this and get the hell out of here?
Yeah, well, just don't go to the Magic Kingdom because they don't sell alcohol there.
I learned that the hard way as well. Yeah, so we bust into Hollywood and see everyone with like Cigar City IPAs. I'm like, this place is heaven.
Where is that?
Yeah, I'll go there.
Let me talk about Landman for a second.
Yeah, of course.
I kind of laughed. Also, I got so many text messages from friends I hadn't talked to in years and whatnot.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is, and there are a couple of scenes in Yellowstone too that were floating around, right? About this issue. Culture is catching up with us.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we've been talking for years and years about this kind of stuff, but it doesn't resonate as well when, Tom Pyle says it versus Billy Bob Thornton, right? It's just indicative of kind of where we are, right?
Yeah.
And it's refreshing. But if you watch Landman, I watched it because I knew I had to. The rest is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so, but the scenes where they talk about this stuff, the way that it is, just means that, Hollywood is now, it's okay to write about this stuff.
Right.
It's okay to talk about this stuff.
Taylor Sheridan has earned the right to kind of write whatever that he wants to, which is
exactly. And people are coming around to the fact that, maybe this stuff is kind of ridiculous too.
Yeah.
The bottom line is I'm not against any energy source,
right,
any vehicle, anything else. What I am against, and this is why that the Democratic Party, and we talked about Europe, centralizing the decision making about energy from the federal government or the EU is a disaster.
Right.
Especially in energy, because it is the input into every single thing.
Right.
It's not just the cars we drive. It's not just the, like the light switch at home. It's embedded in the cost of all our clothes, all our products.
Yeah.
It's, when you order something on Amazon, it doesn't show up on a unicorn, right?
Right.
Transported here with vehicles that are,
a spray painted UPS truck. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, you don't, and it's complicated.
Yeah.
And it's developed over, 150 years. And you can't just disrupt those systems from like an office somewhere in Sacramento or at the EPA headquarters and expect good results. So the goal of our organization is and has always been not to promote fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Promote energy policy that is source neutral, that is doesn't have subsidies, you're not favoring one over another in the regulatory side of the equation. You create the conditions, and which is why I'm so supportive of Donald Trump. you create the conditions by which we can harness our given natural resources in a way that's good for us and good for the world. And man, we are swimming in this stuff. We've done an inventory last year we updated the inventory. We've got hundreds of years of this stuff. Just in the United States alone, if you add Canada to the equation, and if Mexico ever straightened itself out, they would have a similar story. North America has it all.
Right.
And that's soft power as well, right?
And in a nice twist of fate, the United States, at least, right? The notion of free markets, what drives me nuts is, when you have these quasi debates with someone who's pretty adamant, or at least emotionally attached to getting rid of fossil fuels, one of the things that they will, bring up all the time is the threat of climate change, which is fine, right? My thing is, I'm not going to convince someone who believes in climate change that it's not a thing, and I'm not going to convince someone who thinks it's not a thing that it is a thing. Like, I want to remain agnostic to that. I like free market principles, capital discipline, technological innovation, all the buzzwords. But then when you bring up the notion of, and you agree upon, it is a problem, it's like, what do you want solving the problem? Government top-down regulatory attempts to fix the problem? Or do you want a very free markets principled, bottom-up efficiency that frankly has always been the source of problem solutions? Like, that paradigm's not going to shift where all of a sudden immediately top-down regulatory burden is going to solve a problem. Historically, at least since the beginning of the United States, the thing that has solved problem is the power of the free markets and allowing competitive sources to just figure it out and allow innovation, as corny as that sounds. But people immediately forget about that.
Yeah, the two things. One is they think they're smart enough to identify the problem in the first place, which they're usually wrong. And secondly, you talk about transition, and thankfully it's sort of not, the overarching principle here any longer. We've always been in an energy transition.
Yeah.
In the entire history of the world, it's been an energy transition. It was a long, slow, ridiculous one until the Industrial Revolution. And then it changed dramatically, and it continues to change all the time. And when you talk about, you talk about it in terms of addition, not transition. And we aren't going to get off of these resources. We're not. I mean, even when there is something else that comes along that
literally in our kids' lifetimes,
not even beyond that, the world is built on these resources. The question is are you going to empower the people that know how to do it best, know how to extract it, know how to convert it into useful products, know how to move it all over the place, or are you going to try to cut them off at the knees? And that's, part of the problem I have with the green groups is that they think that oil and gas isn't part of the solution that they perceive to be a problem.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, on that note, my friends, it's very clear to me that we have to have a part 2. There's so much left to be talked. I really appreciate the time, man. This was great. We'll figure out a time to get you back on, talk about this 8 things that we didn't get to in our agenda that we originally laid out.
I'm looking at the list. Man,
this is great. I appreciate it so much. We'll be talking soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
My friend.